having that Bitcoin just gives you that ability to step away from work if you need to. Having that possibility, most people don't even have that option, right? So having that option is, I think, really important, and Bitcoin gives you that option. Nothing else really gives you that option, right? So if you had, let's say, stocks, if your government wants to attack you, they can remove access to your stocks immediately. If they want to stop you from doing things, let's say Ben said something on his channel that they didn't like, they could remove his access to his stocks, and there's nothing he can do about it. But with Bitcoin, they can't do that. They can't stop you from transacting.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the main message that I want to get across today anyways, is like, you don't necessarily have to be a content creator to understand what's going on here. This is just centralization in general. And that's kind of what Forrest alluded to right off the hop. And I think that's what people really need to be paying attention to, because it's the same with the banks, right? Like if you got money in the bank, that's not really your money. It's just an IOU from the bank that maybe they'll have money if push comes to shove. Who knows if they have it or not? So that's why it's always a good idea to have some physical cash at your house, obviously some Bitcoin, maybe even some Tether on USDT. So it's kind of out of the banking system, and you're not relying on other people. And you should be thinking about that pretty much in all aspects of your life. You always want to remove the single points of failure. That could be an income stream. That could be a YouTube channel. That could be a bank account. That could even be a Bitcoin exchange, right? I've had this happen to myself before, where the price of Bitcoin went from like 20,000, I think, down to 12,000, and like very quickly. This was a while ago, but I was like, oh my God, I want to buy some sats on sale here. And I go to log into my account, and it was down for maintenance. And that was the only account that I had at the time. And so I was just kind of left sitting there. I couldn't do anything about it. So you always want to make sure that you have a backup of your backup, and make sure that you're kind of decentralized in different places. But let's maybe kick the conversation off here, boys, with in terms of Bitcoin. I know there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there, probably many watching today, who have exposure to Bitcoin, but that doesn't really give you full ownership of Bitcoin. If you're holding it on an exchange, if you're holding it in a custodial wallet, something like Speed or Wallet of Satoshi, it's not really your Bitcoin. It's the same kind of thing as money in the bank. It's just an IOU. So your guys' experience with so the first one on the list here, we're going to have a bit of a checklist here that we're going to go through. But the idea here is if you can kind of do these, you're going to see the true power of Bitcoin and add sovereignty to your life. And that's kind of what Bitcoin does. So let's kick off the first one with sending a transaction on layer one. What's your guys' first experience with this? And do you guys do this often?
I do it quite often, whether it's, consolidating UTXOs. I'm building a business that runs on the Lightning rails, and Lightning Network is a layer 2, but it requires, if you're doing it yourself with your own Lightning channel, it requires you to send an on-chain transaction. So I've been building those channels up, making them robust, and that requires sending a lot of transactions. I manage part of our Maple treasury here. So, that's on-chain transactions. We consolidate within a Lightning channel, and then we swap back into on-chain. So there's all this kind of crossover. An on-chain transaction, maybe we should pull up mempool to even show what that looks like. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'll just bring that up real quick.
That was my second question, is what tools, just so we can have some actionable stuff here, what tools would you guys recommend people use if they did want to send their first Bitcoin transaction?
Well, likely you're going to have that Bitcoin in an exchange, right? You're going to have it a claim to the Bitcoin. So you think that Bitcoin is there, and it probably is, but it's in just one giant wallet, or a few different giant wallets owned by, say, Coinbase. If you have your Bitcoin on Coinbase, and when you take out, your 100,000 Satoshis, whatever it is you take out, they're going to send that from a much larger wallet, and they're going to send that transaction to wherever your receiving address is that you've put in. And then you potentially, if you've sent it to your own wallet in self-custody, then you actually own the right to that Bitcoin, the keys, the ability to move that Bitcoin at any point. Otherwise, you're subject to the whims of that exchange. There's been people saying that they get frozen out. Coinbase says, oh, you're only allowed to move this much. We're worried that maybe you're subjected to a phishing scam. We're not going to allow you to move your Bitcoin. maintenance goes down, right? So there's all these reasons why that Bitcoin is not yours. If you're in a offshore exchange that's shady, something like FTX, that Bitcoin on that exchange could literally not exist. It could be paper Bitcoin, which has happened in the past. So that's why it's important.
Can you explain how it's possible that Bitcoin might not exist? Like what if you see it on the chain, and what if it's there on chain, but what if somebody else owns it? Like what if somebody else has the rights to it?
Yeah,
I guess that's
okay.
what happens with the ETFs. Would you consider, like with Coinbase, for example? Like with Coinbase, I guess they have a massive shared UTXO, and then they say that, okay, this ETF owns this much. It's just a database inside their own system.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a database within their own system. I'm sure that with the ETFs, they probably do have very, like, they don't commingle like the custody of MSTR's Bitcoin with BlackRock's ETF Bitcoin. I'm assuming they don't. They probably have separate wallets where they just manage that to keep it easier for them as well. But an exchange will just have, again, just a couple wallets or whatever, with a lot of people's Bitcoins. So for instance, they might have one wallet that has 1,000 people's Bitcoin within it. And those 1,000 people just own a percentage of the Bitcoin in there. And it's on Coinbase to send that out to them. And so it's all internal accounting with these exchanges. And they just update their own internal spreadsheet when somebody moves that Bitcoin. And you might be able to even see, you might be able to track, if you're really good at chain analysis, or if you hire a chain analysis firm, you might be able to find those wallets that your Bitcoin is in, that is held by those exchanges. But you're still there's still an assumption there. You're still sort of trusting that that is the case and that Coinbase owns that. It could be that, like, it's very difficult to like prove ownership of. It's difficult to prove somebody else's ownership of Bitcoin. You can prove your own ownership of Bitcoin by doing a signature or by doing a transaction from a UTXO, but it's very difficult. You have to assume a certain set of things when looking at a Bitcoin wallet that you don't control. So when you have your Bitcoin on Coinbase and you find Coinbase's wallet, you're assuming that your Bitcoin is in there. You're assuming.
And the problem with that is, like, I think of these exchanges, especially Coinbase. Bitcoin Well is different because they don't custody anybody's Bitcoin, right? But an exchange like Coinbase, I'd look at that as basically just a huge slush fund, right? Yep. Because all that they're doing is they're taking in dollars from people. Like, let's say you wanted to buy Bitcoin, you send them dollars. They keep that. They have a spreadsheet, as Forrest was saying there. It's a spreadsheet between how much cash they have, how much Bitcoin they have, and the potential for them to have more cash than Bitcoin claim to that cash. That's where the whole issue is like, yeah, people, it says you have Bitcoin in your Coinbase account, but that doesn't mean you actually have Bitcoin. If you move it off there, and I think that's why they limit their withdrawals, is because some days they don't necessarily have the matching amount of Bitcoin that they do the deposits on that exchange. So that's why they limit it, because it would be essentially like a bank run on Coinbase. If everybody went to withdraw their Bitcoin from there, but they didn't have enough Bitcoin, that's a problem for them. And so they have to limit their withdrawals to make sure that nothing like that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have your Bitcoin with an exchange, they might have, let's say they have 1,000 Bitcoin, but you're never going to know if they have your Bitcoin, because the thing is that it's all shared with multiple people. You don't know the other people that are working with them. Let's say you know other people who have small amounts of Bitcoin, but if you combine the small amounts of Bitcoin that you know of, you're never going to get to the total amount of Bitcoin that they have. So they have all these massive number of clients. So they could have, let's say, 1,000 Bitcoin in a wallet, but what if their customers are actually owed 10,000 Bitcoin? Where's that extra 9,000 Bitcoin going to come from? And you won't know until enough Bitcoin leaves that exchange. And this is partly why putting Bitcoin in your own wallet is almost like an attack on exchanges. Because
Absolutely.
Right? Because exchanges are almost, in a way, exchanges rely on you leaving your Bitcoin on their exchange so that they can continue with their fractional reserve banking. Like Coinbase, that system that I mentioned there, they show you, they have 1,000 Bitcoin, but they actually owe 10,000 Bitcoin. They assume that people who own 9,000 Bitcoin will never withdraw their Bitcoin. So they think that they can keep charging you fees by selling you, I guess, fake Bitcoin. That's where paper Bitcoin come from. That's where paper Bitcoin comes from. And the only way to avoid that is to put Bitcoin in your own self custody, to buy Bitcoin and put it in your own wallet that nobody else can take over. Nobody else can stop. Nobody else can move. If we go back to that mempool website, any Bitcoin transaction that you see on there, any Bitcoin wallet that you see on there, the only people who can move that Bitcoin are the ones who have the private keys. If you don't have the private keys to that Bitcoin, it's not your Bitcoin. If you
Yes.
have Bitcoin on an exchange, it's not your Bitcoin. You might think it is. It might they might try to convince you that it's your Bitcoin, but it's not your Bitcoin because you don't have the private keys to it. You can't move it.
Yeah, and you can call the bluff, right? Like, we assume, or we hope that Coinbase is a good actor in the space as far as holding the actual Bitcoin they say they have, right? But we're not. We're trusting that. We're hoping for that. And there's a saying in Bitcoin: "Don't trust, verify." And the way to verify is doing that layer one transaction that started this entire conversation, calling the bluff, saying, "Hey, do you actually have my Bitcoin? Can I have it right now?" And withdrawing that into self-custody and ownership. And you're taking it off the exchange. People kind of, there's all this trading that goes on that looks at exchange volume and amounts of Bitcoin on exchange. By taking that out of the exchange's hands, you're potentially taking it out of circulation, and therefore making the price will reflect that, right? The lower amounts of Bitcoin on exchange. And if there is any funny games going on, that is total price suppression. If there's paper Bitcoin, that's going to manipulate the price like crazy. So by taking your Bitcoin into self-custody, you are limiting, as much as you can as an individual, limiting the ability of bad actors to manipulate the Bitcoin price.
I just thought of something. Do you guys think that's why Coinbase always goes down when Bitcoin starts running?
There's probably a couple different reasons.
If the price goes, like, maybe if it's intentional, I don't know if it's intentional, if it's not, this is just pure speculation.
100%.
The way that right? Like,
Yeah.
what if they're doing it so that, because if they create paper Bitcoin, they're basically selling it at the market price. I'm not saying this is happening. I'm just saying, like, what if just a different way to think, right? So if they're creating Bitcoin, they're selling it at the market price. They're expecting that Bitcoin's price will underperform whatever they sold. They're basically shorting Bitcoin. They're shorting naked, basically. That's what it's called, naked shorting. That's what happened with GME. So if they sell enough Bitcoin that they don't have, and enough of the world starts taking self-custody, and enough of the world starts buying Bitcoin, eventually Coinbase is not going to be a majority portion of all trades. Eventually there will be multiple exchanges. That's where the world is going. Eventually these companies that are trying to manipulate the supply by creating paper Bitcoin, they're going to get punished, exactly like FTX. That's essentially what FTX did. Maybe Coinbase isn't doing it. I mean, it's definitely possible because they're audited, but you don't know who you can trust. You have no idea. Even if you were to give your Bitcoin to us, you can't trust us. Even though you've watched our videos for so long, you can't give your, let's say you have 1,000 Bitcoin, you give it to us. How do you know that we're not just going to disappear?
Yeah. I mean, there's a good incentive for us to do so, right?
Right.
I mean, and then, you can trust us, but you shouldn't. Yes. Right? That's the idea there. And the other thing too, is just that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
I actually wanted to mention 1,000 Bitcoin right now seems like a lot, but whatever Bitcoin you have, this is something that Jor says on his channel all the time. Whatever amount of Bitcoin you have, eventually it'll be worth the same as whatever 1,000 Bitcoin is worth today in terms of dollars. Right. So if you have one Bitcoin, that one Bitcoin is going to be worth 1,000 times what it's worth today. So protect your Bitcoin like it is worth 1,000 times what it is today,
and take custody of it.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I think about it. Is, I don't know which one of you said this, but this is how everybody should be thinking about it. Unless your Bitcoin is in a place where you actually have the 12 or 24 words to that wallet, then you don't actually own that Bitcoin. That's the easiest test to figure it out. On Coinbase, you don't have a 12-word private key to that. On Wallet of Satoshi, you don't have a 12-word private key to that. You have to have those private keys. That's the only way that you actually have ownership of that Bitcoin. Otherwise, it's an IOU from somebody else.
Yeah.
So think about it like cash in your hand, physical cash in your house. You probably feel a lot more safe with that versus leaving it in a bank. And it's the exact same thing. Money in the bank is just an IOU from the bank saying that they owe you this, right? That's all it is. And that's what Bitcoin held on an exchange is. And that's what Bitcoin held in a custodial wallet is, the same thing. So
I just had a quick comment that I wanted to say about the Coinbase going down while the price is going up. There's this saying, never attribute malice to what can be explained with ignorance. And I think Coinbase is just a dog shit company.
Nice.
I don't think
That would make sense,
necessarily
too.
there's paper Bitcoin or there's malice there. I think they underfund their servers. They don't know what they're doing. I think they're trash. I just think they're a stupid company.
There's something also to consider here. I completely understand your point there. Just something a little bit different. Keep in mind that not everybody is going to be able to take self custody.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have
No,
at some point,
100%.
you have like the people who are in Bitcoin now are very early because they can interact with the base layer of Bitcoin. And if you think about the wire transfer the current financial system with wire transfers, how many times have you sent a wire transfer? I think I've maybe sent
A
one.
handful.
Yeah, I've
right?
sent half a dozen max.
Yeah, maybe 1 to 10. Most
Mhm.
people in the chat, I mean, if you want to mention it, how many times have you sent a wire transfer? Most people haven't. And that's, I think the Bitcoin base layer is even more secure than wire transfers. So it's the availability to transact on the Bitcoin base layer is going to be more scarce. So keep in mind that you have a limited amount of time where you can actually take self custody of your money. Eventually, you're not going to be able to you're not going to have enough Bitcoin to be able to make it worthwhile to transact on the base layer. Eventually, everybody's going to be on these layer 2s like Lightning. I don't know what's going to happen in 10, 15 years, but I don't think that the amount of block space can expand enough to account for every single transaction that's ever going to happen. You're going to have servers running the Bitcoin nodes. You're going to have Amazon web services running Bitcoin nodes. You're not going to be able to do it at home because it's going to require so much more space. So over time, people are going to have to move to layer 2s, layer 3s, layer 5s. There's probably going to be layer 10s on top of Bitcoin. People are very confused about that. People think that, Bitcoin is supposed to be a way to get rid of centralization, but no, that's not the point. The point is that the base layer is so solid that nothing can change it. Nothing can stop it from working exactly how it's supposed to work. So let's say if the US government wants to print more Bitcoin, they can't. If the US government goes bankrupt and everybody on earth is on a Bitcoin standard, the US government's bankruptcy doesn't affect everybody else's finances. So that's exactly what applies here. So if you have your Bitcoin in self-custody and Coinbase collapses, you're not impacted. You may be impacted temporarily because Bitcoin's price might fall, but over the long term, you're not impacted because you still have the exact amount of Bitcoin that you thought you had. So if you have 1 Bitcoin, you still have 1 Bitcoin, even if Coinbase goes bankrupt. So if you take self-custody, remember, you're in that very temporary, that temporarily available time where you can actually take self-custody. That's the first thing. And the next thing is that self-custody is going to protect you no matter what. Like, it's going to protect you if your exchanges go bankrupt, if the entire world bans Bitcoin, nobody can take your Bitcoin from you unless they get your private keys from you. So taking self-custody is, it's going to be very rare. People who actually take self-custody are going to be very rare, at least from what I think. I think people are going to get paid directly on layer 2s, layer 3s. They're going to get paid on Lightning. They're going to get paid on Lightning, and they're going to have their own wallet, let's say with a bank. Maybe MicroStrategy might create some kind of layer 2, layer 3, layer 5, and they'll provide the liquidity for it, right? Yeah, exactly, strats. But over time, So over time, taking self-custody is the best thing you can do, and it's very rare. So in 10 years, 15 years, you may not be hearing people talking about this really at all.
It's possible. I mean, we're kind of projecting an idea into the future and seeing, making a prediction, which is really, really, really hard to do. There's also the possibility that we have some breakthroughs in hardware technology, and it actually makes it easier to makes it so easy to run nodes that then making the block size bigger and making their more thorough traffic and less expensive on the base layer makes sense because of how cheap it is now to run a node because of breakthroughs in technology. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying I'm advocating for that. I'm just saying that's a possible future. That expanding the block size doesn't mean that it all has to go to AWS and that only companies and massive server farms can run the blockchain. We don't really know what the future is, but as far as where we're trending, and if we extrapolate out where we are, it is likely that what Rajat is saying it will come true, which is that it will be very difficult to do on-chain base layer transactions, and we will have a robust layer 2 and layer 3 systems that interact and actually use real Bitcoin, but in a cheaper, more efficient, faster microtransaction style way, with maybe collaborative type custody situations like Fediments, like layer 2, or like a sidechain like Liquid solves a lot of the issues that, I would say the main issue that Lightning has, which is that Lightning really lends itself to a custodial scenario. It's much easier to use Lightning using somebody else's Lightning channel than to run your own. Whereas with Liquid Bitcoin, it's a side chain, you peg in Bitcoin, and that is held in like a large multi-sig. So you're trusting some third parties, but you're trusting enough of them that it's essentially next to impossible for them to rug you out of that Bitcoin. Whereas with a custodial scenario with Lightning, you're trusting basically one counterparty. So that is a vulnerability and risk. But these are only the technologies we have so far on top of Bitcoin. There's going to be more and more developed on this. I personally think the smartest people in the world are working on Bitcoin. They're working on Bitcoin and they're working on AI. The two smartest groups of people in the world are working on those two technologies because they're the most fundamental game-changing technologies that we have currently and into the future.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, that's something that not a whole lot of people talk about within Bitcoin, is just not only the capital flowing out of the fiat system, but also the intelligence. Like it's a real brain drain flowing from these government, decentralized entities, the fiat system in general. Everybody who knows, has some vision and some ability is building on Bitcoin right now. And that's a pretty good sign. I think that's a place you want to be, not where everybody was before, but where everybody's going to, which is Bitcoin.
Skate to where the puck is going to be.
Yeah, agreed. So IceOH there said, so what Rajat is saying, that essentially 1 million sats won't be spendable, so it's not worth self-custodying it. No, I don't agree with that. I think 1 million sats is going to be so much money that people won't even be able to imagine having that amount of Satoshis. 1 million Satoshis is going to be way more than the average person is ever going to come across. So if you have 1 million sats in self-custody, at some point, you're definitely going to be able to use that. You're going to be able to, if fiat still survives, you're going to be able to take loans against it. Can you imagine if you have 1 million sats in self-custody today, at some point you're able to take a $500,000 loan against it? That'd be crazy.
Yep. The other thing here too is the mempool is a little bit unpredictable, because if you look in the past, there was times where people were paying like 77 sats per VByte, but priced in dollars, that's less than what it costs now to send 1 sat per VByte. But you look back at that, whoa, 77 sats, like you're spending like 1,000 sats to do a transaction, but it's like 10 cents or whatever it is. Like it's incredibly cheap. But there was a lot of demand for block space, and there's a lot of efficiencies that have been developed over time, like batch transactions, layer 2s. Again, a lot of activity on Lightning has taken on-chain transactions out of the mempool. We'll just see more efficiencies with that. So there could be, again, the future is very unpredictable, but there could be a scenario in the future where you can do on-chain transactions, again, if you have a large amount enough, because the layer 2s and the layer 3s are taking so much activity off of that on-chain still. Like right now, you can totally do on-chain transactions. It's like 1 to 4 sats per VByte. It's really not that competitive. People are not dying for block space right now. There's not a huge lineup to get into the mempool. It's pretty easy to do on-chain right now.
And while we're talking about layer 1 transactions, the one thing I would say where a lot of people get this wrong is they've seen some Bitcoin transactions that might cost $10 or $15 worth of Bitcoin, because when the mempool gets busier, when there's more people wanting to use it, you have to pay a higher fee based on the priority, how fast you want that to go through. But it doesn't really matter how much you're sending. You could actually send $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. If that's all in one UTXO, that's going to cost you about 10 cents today. So it has nothing to do with the amount of Bitcoin that you're sending. It has everything to do with the amount of data or the amount of UTXOs that you're sending within that transaction. So that's something to be aware of. I know there's a whole different thing, that we could talk about. We could honestly spend 4 hours talking about this because there's so many intricacies to know about this. And one thing we're doing is actually we're building speaking of getting off of YouTube, we're actually building our own school community right now. And we'll probably mention it a little bit later in the episode, but it's going to have every single resource you'll need to know about this kind of stuff, about UTXOs, about managing your private keys, about sending a layer 1 transaction. We're going to put something together using what we already have, plus build on top of that, just so everybody's very comfortable holding their own keys. That's the whole point of what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and over time we're gonna be building that up. We're gonna be creating more and more content on there, adding more value to that. The price. So we're still thinking about what the price should be today, but over time the price will go up. We're going to continue to increase the price as more information is added to it, as we add more value to it. We're going to do some schedule of live sessions that we do only on there, and we're not going to do those live sessions on here. We're going to try to make it as valuable as possible.
Yeah, the value is going to grow and the cost is going to grow associated with that value.
Yeah. Right. So should we share that link right now with people? Do you have it, Rajat? Do you have it handy?
I do. I'll find it here.
So this is something we've been working on for about the last month. We kind of have the basics in there right now. We're going to be adding stuff pretty much every day for the next, foreseeable future. And so what kind of our idea is here, because we don't have a whole lot on there right now, is we're going to have a very cheap introductory price. And then I think after 50 members, we're going to increase it. We're going to double it. And we're just going to keep doing that until, it gets to a point where it doesn't make sense for people to join. But we'll see how high that gets to. So if you are wanting to join our school community, Rajat, did you share it there?
I'm going to share it now. I was just checking to make sure it's good. I'll
so
share it now.
Kind of the idea here is that we're going to set the introductory price to be $21 per month. After the first 50 members sign up, we're going to increase it to be $42 per month. Because we really believe that the content and the value that we have in here in terms of Bitcoiners learning how to protect their keys and secure their keys, plus a lot of other things, is way beyond this value. We want to make sure that it's still attainable to the average person. We know there's a lot of people with a lot of money in here, but there's also a lot of people who don't have as much money in here. So if you want to get in there, you're going to have the first chance to get in at the introductory price, and then it's just going to keep going up and up and up from there. So it should be in the chat there. Rajat just shared it. And
you lock in that price that you get in at. So that's really key. There's a real incentive to get in early. So yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, just to kind of, because that's an important part. That was a question that I had, is like, if somebody joined today at $21 and we increase the price, would they also get increased with that? But the answer is no. You actually lock in that price forever. We're actually going to have some SATs ability too that we'll be reaching out to members for if you'd rather pay in Bitcoin. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is there. So again, there's not a whole lot in there today, but we do plan on adding a lot over these next couple of weeks. And we kind of want to just give everybody, people watching today, the opportunity to get in at that first initial price there.